I remember the first moment I set foot on Afghan soil like it was yesterday, though it's been years. The heat hit me before the plane even touched the tarmac, a dry, choking wave that carried the scent of dust, smoke, and something else, something I couldn't name. The kind of smell that burrows into your lungs and refuses to leave. Around me, the rest of the NATO contingent moved with rehearsed precision, but I could see it in their eyes. This wasn't just another deployment. There was a tension, a nervous undercurrent, like the land itself was watching us, waiting. The helicopter's rotors whipped the sand into blinding clouds as we disembarked. My boots sank slightly into the dirt, the ground warm beneath me. Dust coated my uniform almost instantly. The mountains loomed in the distance, jagged and unforgiving, their shadows stretching far and wide across the valleys. I felt small, vulnerable, exposed. And I hated that feeling. I hated it because it was real. As we moved toward the makeshift NATO forward operating base, I noticed the villagers watching from a distance. Their faces were unreadable, eyes dark, almost hollow. They didn't wave. They didn't hide. They simply watched. For a moment, I felt that same prickling unease that the men in my unit had been joking about earlier. The kind soldiers never admit aloud. The kind that creeps up when the desert heat hits your nerves raw. Inside the base, the noise was relentless. The constant hum of generators, the distant thrum of helicopters overhead, the occasional crack of gunfire somewhere beyond the perimeter. It was chaos-controlled, organized, but somehow wrong. I walked past a stack of crates stamped with NATO insignias, the sharp metallic scent of ammunition cutting through the dusty air. There were soldiers everywhere, some laughing, some silent, but all of them alert, their eyes darting to shadows, to sounds, to anything that might move when it shouldn't. The briefing room smelled of sweat, metal, and paper. Maps of the surrounding regions were pinned to the walls, dotted with markers. Villages, known IED sites, Taliban positions. Our mission was straightforward in words, but complicated in reality. Patrol, observe, engage if necessary, survive. The officers spoke with practiced confidence, but I noticed their hands, tight fists, trembling slightly, betraying the calm they tried to project. That first night, the base felt alive in the wrong way. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the sandbags, flickering in the generator lights. I heard noises that didn't match any machine. Faint whispers in Pashto that I couldn't understand. The soft shuffle of movement beyond the perimeter. And the low, almost imperceptible hum of something else. I brushed it off. You always brush it off at first. You tell yourself it's fatigue, nerves, imagination. But deep down, you know the land doesn't forget. It remembers. Sleep was impossible. Even inside the tent, I could hear the desert breathing around me. The faint, scraping whisper of sand shifting over rocks. The distant call of animals I couldn't name. The unsettling thrum of helicopters circling overhead. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw shadows moving where none should be. Forms too quick, too fluid, too deliberate to be mere trickery of light. By morning, our first patrol was briefed. We were to move through a nearby village, observe for Taliban activity, and report back. The route was simple, a narrow dirt path cutting between ruined buildings, some still smoking from previous strikes. The sun was merciless, beating down like it was trying to burn every shadow from the earth. I could feel the weight of my gear. The rifle, body armor, communications packed. But heavier still was the weight pressing on my chest. The unshakable feeling that someone, or something, was already there, waiting. We moved out. Our boots crunched over broken tile and sand. The only sound we made deliberately. The only sound under our control. The village was eerily silent. No signs of life beyond the occasional flutter of fabric in the wind. Doors hung open like gaping mouths. Windows shattered. Dust swirling in narrow beams of sunlight. Every corner promised danger. Every alleyway whispered secrets. And then it happened. A shadow flickered across the alley to our right. Too fast. Too dark. My heart skipped. I called it out. My team froze. There was nothing there. Not a Taliban fighter. Not an animal. Not a stray dog. Just the wind carrying dust. Or so I told myself. But I could feel eyes on us. Not human eyes. Something colder, older, patient. That first day passed without gunfire, without casualties. But by the end of it, I was already changed. Something had touched the edges of my mind. A sensation that was physical and psychic at the same time. The desert wasn't empty. It was full of watching shapes, whispers, and histories that refused to remain buried. Back at base, I sat alone for a long time, staring at the maps, tracing the paths we would patrol, wondering which corners hid enemies we could see, and which corners hid enemies we couldn't. Sleep came fitfully that night, but even in dreams, the shadows followed. By the time the sun rose again over the jagged mountains, I understood one simple truth. Afghanistan in 2005 was not just a battlefield. It was alive, and it was hungry. The night had a weight to it, like the sky itself was pressing down on us. I double-checked my gear under the dim glow of the helmet light, the soft clink of metal against metal sounding unnervingly loud in the stillness. My rifle was clean, loaded, and heavy in my hands, the stock worn smooth from months of use. Around me, my squad moved quietly, their faces shadowed, eyes sharp. We were walking into a ghost. Our mission was simple. Recon the outskirts of a village known for Taliban activity. Gather intel, report. Simple in words, impossible in reality. The desert stretched in every direction, jagged mountains casting dark shapes over the land. The village itself appeared as a cluster of crumbling buildings, their edges jagged against the night sky. Broken windows, like the hollow eyes of some ancient monster staring at us. The first steps through the sand were soft, careful. Every footfall a deliberate negotiation with the earth. The wind whispered in the canyons, carrying the faintest hint of gunpowder and something else, something metallic, almost like distant machinery grinding. I wasn't supposed to notice it. I shouldn't have, but I did. My stomach knotted. As we entered the village, I kept my eyes peeled for movement. Nothing moved. Nothing except the shadows, stretching and twisting in ways that didn't belong to the structures casting them. I caught glimpses of shapes out of the corner of my eye, vanishing when I turned to face them. My pulse quickened. I forced my breathing to slow, counting each inhale. "Keep it tight," our sergeant whispered. His voice barely carried over the sand scraping against stone. I nodded, moving closer to the soldier ahead of me. The buildings flanked us like silent sentinels. Every door frame was a doorway to danger. Every broken wall a hiding place. Then it happened. A sound, a soft shuffle, almost imperceptible. I froze motionless. The others did too. There, at the edge of my vision, a figure, or maybe a shadow, shifted. Not human, not entirely. The desert wind couldn't have made that movement. I raised my rifle slowly, trained on the alley. Nothing, just the faint rustle of sand. "Probably a stray dog," muttered one of the guys, but his voice betrayed doubt. None of us laughed. None of us believed him. We pressed on, moving deeper into the village. Broken pottery littered the streets, and the skeletal remains of vehicles were half buried in sand. Our boots kicked up clouds that sparkled briefly in the weak moonlight, but the shadows didn't react to the light. They moved independently, crawling along walls, sliding across the ground alive. Every now and then, we would hear a whisper. Not words I could understand, just low, guttural sounds in Pashto, carried on the wind. They weren't threats. They were warnings, or maybe invitations. I couldn't tell. My team didn't react to them, at least not outwardly, but I could see the tension in their shoulders, the way their hands gripped weapons a little tighter. We entered the center of the village, a small square where a well sat, cracked and dry. I glanced around, noticing markings on the walls, symbols carved in haste, jagged lines, spirals, shapes that shouldn't exist. The sergeant noticed them too, his brow furrowed. He muttered something under his breath in German, something about superstition, but I knew better than to think superstition would explain it. Then the eyes appeared. Not human eyes. Too large, reflective, catching the moonlight like glass. They stared at us from the shadows of the alleyways. My stomach turned. I pointed them out, but by the time the others turned, they were gone. The sense of being watched, of being hunted, pressed on me like a weight. We pressed on cautiously, sweeping every street, every doorway. The village was quiet, almost too quiet. No animals, no distant shouts, just us and the whispers, and the eyes that vanished when confronted. Every corner I rounded, I expected something to lunge. Every shadow seemed alive. The sergeant signaled a halt. We huddled in the remains of a half-collapsed building, our backs against the wall. Sweat dripped from my forehead, sticking my hair to my scalp despite the cold night air. My rifle trembled slightly in my hands, not from fear alone, but from the unnatural tension that hung in the air. Did anyone else feel that? I whispered. The soldier next to me nodded, eyes wide. It's like the village itself is moving, he said. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I could feel it, the land, the buildings, the shadows, even the wind, watching, waiting. Something in the night shifted, subtle, deliberate, almost a pulse beneath my skin. I tightened my grip on my rifle. We finished the patrol without incident, or at least without a gunfight. No Taliban, no insurgents, nothing human. But as we walked back to base, the feeling didn't leave. It followed us, creeping in every shadow, whispering in every gust of wind. Back at the base, I sat alone for hours, trying to shake the unease. Sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the tents, every flap of canvas, made me jump. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. Whispers lingered in my ears. I realized then that this wasn't just war. It was something else. Something old, patient, and hungry. By the time dawn broke, casting pale light over the mountains, I understood one thing. Tonight was only the beginning. The desert had opened its eyes, and we had walked right into its stare. The patrol had been quiet, almost unnervingly so. The village we had scouted earlier had left its mark on my mind. The shadows, the eyes, the whispers, but in daylight, it seemed less threatening. That was a lie. Everything about this place screamed danger, but in Afghanistan, danger was normal. What came next, though, was anything but normal. We moved along a narrow pass, flanked by jagged cliffs. Dust rose in small clouds with every step, and the sun baked the rocks so intensely that I could feel the heat radiating through my boots. The sergeant signaled us to spread out slightly, the standard protocol for possible ambush zones. I led one flank, rifle ready, scanning every rock, every crevice, every flicker of movement. Then it hit us. The first shots were sudden, deafening. Explosions erupted from the cliffs above, sending showers of rock and sand into the air. My ears rang. The world reduced to flashes of chaos. Men shouted, and the air filled with the metallic scent of gunfire. Bullets whizzed past us with terrifying speed. I hit the ground instinctively, rolling behind the remnants of a collapsed wall. My heart pounded as I scanned the area. Shadows moved faster than soldiers should move. Too fluid, too deliberate. Some figures ducked behind rocks with impossible speed. Others appeared in places we hadn't noticed, firing from impossible angles. My squad was under attack, but this wasn't just a Taliban ambush. Something was wrong. "Contact front," shouted the sergeant, but the voice felt distant, muffled, swallowed by the roar of gunfire and the grinding pulse of fear. I returned fire. firing instinctively at shadows more than anything tangible. One of the soldiers beside me screamed, then went silent. I didn't have time to check. Another explosion rocked the pass. It wasn't just bullets we were facing. Rocks and sand seemed to move of their own accord, falling in unnatural arcs. Shadows clung to corners, stretching impossibly, creeping along walls without light to cast them. I caught sight of a figure, tall, impossibly thin, almost skeletal, slipping between two boulders. I squeezed the trigger. Nothing. The figure vanished, leaving only the echo of a whisper in Pashto that chilled me to the bone. Men started disappearing. One moment, they were there, returning fire, shouting orders, calling my name. The next, empty spaces. Equipment left behind. Boots abandoned in the dust. I found myself screaming for them, but the sound seemed swallowed by the desert itself. I ran. I moved between cover points, firing blindly, calling for my squad. Some responded, others didn't. Every step, every heartbeat, was measured against a fear I had never known. The ground seemed to shift beneath me. Shadows closed in from all directions, yet no human enemy was fully visible. I stumbled into a ruined compound, barricading myself in a collapsed building. My hands were slick with sweat and blood, my own, from a shallow cut on my arm. The rifle shook in my grip as I scanned the streets. There was no one, no Taliban, no enemy, only shadows and whispers, creeping along walls, slipping across sand, waiting. Hours, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell, passed in that ruin. Every sound, every shadow, made me flinch. I tried to count my squad members, but my memory of them was fragmented, disjointed. Some names lingered, others were swallowed by the terror of the desert night. Then I saw it, a shadow detached from the darkness, moving with an intelligence that made my stomach turn. It was humanoid but wrong. Elongated limbs, too many joints, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, teeth reflecting the last rays of the sun like glass. It moved closer, silent, deliberate. I squeezed the trigger, fired repeatedly. The bullet struck the ground, kicking up dust, but the shadow didn't falter. It paused, cocking its head as if studying me. I froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. In that moment, the desert itself seemed to pulse around me. I realized we weren't just under attack, we were being hunted. A scream shattered the stillness. My ears bled, my vision blurred. I spun around, only to see another shadow engulf a soldier. The man vanished mid-scream, leaving behind only his helmet rolling across the sand. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. Instinct took over. I ran through alleys, across rooftops, through ruins, bullets pinging off walls. Every step felt like it carried me further into the desert's grip, yet closer to death. Shadows followed, whispers circling my mind like vultures. By nightfall, I was alone. My squad was gone, vanished. Not dead, not captured. Gone. My rifle was empty, my body bruised and bleeding. I collapsed behind a wall, gasping, praying, swearing, anything to keep the cold fear at bay. And then, the whispers came closer. Clear now. Not in the wind, not in the echoes of explosions. They spoke my name. Not once, not twice, but over and over. I pressed my back against the stone, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow. I don't know how long I stayed there, shaking, praying for a miracle, for any sign of life, for dawn. I heard movement, soft, deliberate steps, but never saw a soul. The desert held its secrets close, letting only the whispers leak through, teasing me with fear I couldn't outrun. When the sun finally rose, painting the mountains in shades of gray and gold, I crawled back to the nearest safe perimeter. My uniform was torn, my boots shredded, my mind fractured. The sergeant later told me they found no bodies, no sign of my squad, only footprints leading to nowhere and dust stirred by wind. I survived, Barely, but the desert didn't release me. Its whispers followed me back to base, into my dreams, into every shadow I saw from that day forward. That ambush, if you can call it that, wasn't just bullets and explosions. It was something older, something patient, something that waited for men like us to wander into its teeth. And I had walked straight into them. Returning to base should have felt like safety, a place to regroup and catch our breath. It didn't. The perimeter lights cast long, jagged shadows across the sandbags and tents, shadows that seemed to twist and shift even when the wind died down. My boots crunched softly over gravel, but I could hear things moving where no one should be. Inside the tent, my comrades avoided my gaze. Some were nursing minor wounds. Others stared blankly at the walls, as though trying to convince themselves the desert hadn't already taken more than it should. The sergeant gave orders with a mechanical precision that didn't match the fear I saw flickering in his eyes. I tried to sleep, but the moment my head hit the dusty mat, I heard them. Whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind, twisting through the flaps of our tents. Then the words came, low, guttural, unmistakable. They weren't in English, not in any language I knew. Pashto maybe, but wrong. Twisted, hissing. Each syllable carried a weight, pressing down on my chest. I bolted upright. My rifle was in my hands before I even realized I'd moved. I scanned the tent, but it was empty. Just the others, still asleep, or pretending to be. I whispered their names. No answer. The whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, circling, sliding along the edges of my vision. I could feel them in the walls, in the floor, in the air itself. Outside, the desert breathed. The sand shifted, moving unnaturally, almost alive. Shadows pooled and stretched. Shapes darted just beyond the range of light, impossible to focus on, impossible to track. One of the soldiers, a young private named Harris, stirred, mumbling. He said something that made no sense. They want the fire, they want it now. I shook him. He didn't respond. His eyes were open, but blank, glazed over, as if he were somewhere else entirely. I could feel it, the fear, the malice, the patient intelligence that had followed me from the mountains, from the ambush. The desert was alive with them, watching, whispering, waiting. I left the tent, rifle ready. The base was quiet in an unnatural way. No voices, no generators humming, just the wind and the sand moving like water. I crept between tents, scanning every shadow. Something moved, just at the edge of the floodlight, near the perimeter wall. I froze. The figure was humanoid but wrong. Too tall, too thin. Limbs bent at angles that shouldn't exist. It paused, cocked its head toward me, then vanished. A sudden, high-pitched scream pierced the night. One of the men outside, the communications operator, had collapsed. When we ran to him, he was twitching violently, mumbling in a language none of us understood, scratching at his own skin, as if trying to tear the whispers out of his head. Then he went still. Dead, or maybe not. His eyes, wide open, seemed to glimmer in the dim light. I couldn't breathe. My pulse hammered in my ears. I felt their presence everywhere. The shadows, the walls, the wind. Every whispered word, every glance from the darkness, was a threat. I stumbled into the mess tent. Inside, a single candle flickered. On the wall, symbols had appeared overnight, scratched deep into the wooden panels. I didn't see anyone do it. The lines were jagged, chaotic, yet precise in a way that unnerved me. Spirals, twisted humanoid shapes, eyes staring from impossible angles. My stomach churned. I ran outside again. The night was alive, the desert itself shifting beneath the pale light of the moon. Shapes danced on the horizon, some resembling men, others something else entirely. They circled the perimeter, whispering, hissing, urging. I didn't understand, but the meaning was clear. They were waiting, testing, hunting. I could feel the men at the base trembling, trying to convince themselves it was exhaustion or hallucination. I wanted to tell them I knew better, but words failed me. By midnight, half the squad was wandering aimlessly, staring at shadows, muttering to themselves. A few barricaded themselves in tents, eyes wide, screaming at imagined forms. I found myself alone on the edge of the base, staring into the desert. The whispers were louder here, surrounding me, circling my head. I wanted to run, to flee into the mountains, but I knew the desert would claim me before I got a step away. Then I saw it, a figure standing beyond the perimeter, watching, not moving, not hissing, not whispering, just watching. I raised my rifle, but it didn't flinch. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the pale moonlight. My hand shook. I squeezed the trigger. The figure dissolved into the shadows, leaving only the echo of its gaze, the memory of being seen by something older, smarter, hungrier than any man I had ever encountered. By dawn, I was alone again, wandering between tents. Some soldiers were gone, disappeared silently during the night. Others were dead, twisted into positions no human could naturally fall into. My hand was shaking uncontrollably. I realized then that this war was no longer just against men. It was against the desert itself, against the shadows, against the whispers, and I was in the middle of it. The morning light was harsh, washing the desert in a cruel, white glare. After the night at the base, I should have been exhausted, broken, ready to collapse, but I couldn't stay. I had to move. I had to see the village myself. The whispers, the vanished men, the shadows, they were not just in my head. They were real, and I needed to understand them before the desert swallowed me completely. The village lay several kilometers from our base, a skeletal cluster of buildings half buried in sand. As I approached, I noticed something unsettling immediately. No animals, no birds, no movement. Even the wind seemed hesitant, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Broken doors swayed gently, the hinges creaking in the absence of wind, and windows reflected the sun in shards, like tiny watchful eyes. I entered the first street cautiously, rifle raised. Sand crunched underfoot, but the sound echoed unnaturally, as if the village absorbed noise only to amplify it later. The buildings on either side were scarred, bullet holes, burn marks, splintered doors. But what unsettled me more were the markings carved into the walls. Spirals, jagged humanoid shapes, and symbols I didn't understand. Some seemed older than the conflict itself, layered beneath more recent scars. A movement caught my eye. Too quick to be human, too deliberate to be wind. I spun, scanning the alleys. Nothing. The air was still oppressive. The village seemed alive in its silence, breathing through the cracks in the walls, whispering in a language older than any man. I moved deeper, entering a small courtyard. The remains of a well sat at its center, cracked and dry, stones jagged. My boots clinked against rubble, and then I heard it, a faint rustle, like fabric brushing against stone. I froze, listening. The sound came again, and this time I saw them, shadows moving against the walls, twisting, elongating. Not human, not anything I had seen before. I raised my rifle, heart hammering, and fired at the nearest shadow. It dissipated, but left behind a coldness that crept into my chest. The whispering began again, louder now, circling my head, impossible to locate. I staggered back, realizing that the village itself was watching, testing me, feeding on fear. I entered a ruined house, stepping carefully over debris. Inside, the air was stale, heavy. Dust particles floated in beams of sunlight, and for a moment I thought I saw figures crouched in corners, watching. I blinked. They were gone, but the feeling of being observed lingered, pressing against my skull. Then I found them. Signs of previous Nato patrols. Broken rifles, a helmet cracked open, a boot left upright in the sand. No bodies. Nothing but the remnants of men who had walked here and never returned. My stomach knotted. I realized then that the desert didn't just kill, it claimed. Slowly, deliberately. And whatever haunted this place didn't care about uniforms, alliances, or orders. I pressed on, each step heavier than the last. The whispers coalesced into words, just barely intelligible. Names, orders, screams, calls for help that had long since been ignored. Shadows darted at the edge of my vision, shapes too fast to track, limbs bending in ways they shouldn't. The sun dipped lower, stretching the shadows across the village like black rivers. I reached what had once been the central square. The air was unnaturally cold here. The shadows pooled, moving independently of any source of light. And in the middle of the square I saw it, a figure tall, thin, with elongated limbs and eyes that reflected the dying sunlight like molten glass. It didn't move, but its presence pressed on me, a psychic weight that made it hard to breathe. I raised my rifle instinctively, hands shaking, and fired. The figure didn't flinch. Then, in a blink, it was gone, leaving behind only the echo of its gaze, the lingering dread of being seen by something older, patient, and malicious. I stumbled backward, realizing that I had wandered into a place that existed outside the normal rules of warfare. I tried to leave, retracing my steps, but the village seemed to shift around me. Streets that had been straight now twisted. Buildings that had been upright now leaned at impossible angles. Every step I took brought me deeper into its maze, and the whispers followed me, mocking, teasing, promising death. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. Time had no meaning here. I saw shapes in the ruins, humans, ghosts, something else. I couldn't tell. Every turn brought the sense of being hunted. The air itself was alive, watching, weighing my every move. I understood then that no man could fully escape this place. The village was a predator, patient, deliberate, feeding on fear, consuming the lost. Finally, as the sun dipped below the mountains, I found a path that led back to the open desert. My legs shook. My rifle felt like a dead weight. But I ran. Behind me, the village remained silent, deceptively so, as if it had only let me leave to chase me further another day. By the time I reached the base, night was falling. The whispers didn't stop. They followed me into my tent, around the perimeter, through every shadow. Sleep was impossible. I realized then that I had glimpsed only a fraction of what the desert held. The village wasn't empty. It never had been. It was waiting, watching, learning, and I had survived, just barely. The desert sun beat down mercilessly as I trudged toward a small, rocky plateau, following a trail I hadn't noticed the day before. The village and its shadows still haunted my mind, but this new location had a different pull, a sense of something ancient and deadly waiting to be discovered. My boots sank into the sand with each step, carrying me closer to what I now feared might be another test of endurance or sanity. And then I saw it. Scattered across the plateau were the remnants of Soviet-era military vehicles. Tanks half buried in sand, armored personnel carriers rusted and jagged, artillery pieces twisted and broken as if chewed by some giant unseen force. At first glance, they were just relics, abandoned and useless. But the longer I stared, the more I noticed something wrong. The machinery seemed alive. Subtle movements, shifts in position that defied the stillness of the desert. I approached cautiously, rifle raised. The metal groaned under the heat, but there was a rhythm to the noise, almost deliberate. My shadow stretched across the tank, and for a fraction of a second, it didn't match my movements. I froze, heart hammering. Something was watching, something patient, assessing. As I moved among the wreckage, I noticed markings, scratches, symbols, and crude humanoid etchings. They were similar to what I had seen in the village, but older, layered beneath rust and sand. Some of the shapes looked impossibly precise, mechanical yet organic at the same time. I ran my hand along the hull of a tank, and a shiver ran through me. The metal was cold, unnaturally so, as if it had absorbed the chill of something hidden deep inside. Then I heard it, the first of many low, grinding hums. Not mechanical in the traditional sense, not electrical, more like a deep, resonant vibration that emanated from the machinery itself, vibrating through the soles of my boots, up my legs, into my chest. I staggered, trying to steady my breathing. My pulse raced. A shadow flickered at the corner of my vision, and I turned sharply. Nothing. Then another movement, faster, more deliberate. Between the tanks, I glimpsed a figure, or several figures. Too tall, too thin, limbs bent in impossible angles. They didn't run, they didn't crawl. They moved like the machinery itself had taught them motion, as if the relics of war had created their own predators. I raised my rifle and fired. The bullet struck metal and sand. Sparks flew. The shadows didn't flinch. One of them moved closer, its eyes faintly glowing, reflecting the sun like molten iron. My stomach churned. My rational mind screamed at me. Machines can't have life. Figures can't move like this. Yet the evidence of my senses said otherwise. I ran, weaving between tanks, hopping over twisted steel and broken treads. Each time I glanced back, the shadows followed, gliding over the wreckage without effort, melding with the shapes of the abandoned vehicles. I stumbled into an artillery piece, and it shifted under my weight, as if alive. The barrel turned slightly, pointing toward me, though no hands or mechanisms moved it. I screamed and scrambled away. The whispering began again, low, guttural, originating from the machinery itself. Words in a tongue I didn't understand, but I felt their meaning. Leave, or join them. I ran faster. The plateau seemed to stretch, the horizon moving farther away even as I sprinted. Every tank, every armored shell, every rusted hull pulsed with unseen energy, as if the machines themselves had become sentient hunters. A sudden explosion behind me threw sand into the air. I hit the ground, covering my face. When I looked up, a tank's turret had moved, aimed directly at me, though nothing should have triggered it. The barrel rattled ominously, like a growl. My mind screamed for explanation, but there was none. Logic had no place here. I bolted toward the ridge, my boots sliding in the loose sand. Behind me, the machinery shifted, creaking and groaning, shadows dancing along rusted metal as if mocking my attempt to escape. I tripped over a half-buried wheel, sprawling into the sand, my rifle skidding away. I grabbed it and scrambled upright, racing toward a narrow canyon that promised cover. The shadows didn't chase me directly. They followed indirectly, weaving through the machines, appearing at impossible angles, always on the edge of my vision. Their presence was oppressive, a constant weight pressing against my chest. I realized then that this wasn't just a field of abandoned vehicles. It was a trap, a hunting ground, a place where war's dead machinery and whatever haunted it had merged into something far older, far more patient, and far more dangerous than anything I had faced in uniform. By the time I reached the canyon, my lungs burned, my body ached, and my mind reeled. I turned for a final glance. The plateau was quiet again, deceptively still. The tanks and artillery lay silent, inert in appearance. Yet I knew the truth. They were waiting, watching, learning, and when the next soldier wandered too close, they would awaken again. I stumbled down into the shadowed canyon, every step heavy with dread, realizing that the desert's secrets were deeper, darker, and far more malevolent than any human enemy. And I was still alive, barely, but alive. The desert never sleeps, and neither did I. Ever since the ambush and the plateau of machines, my mind had been on edge, every shadow, every whisper twisting into dread. I couldn't stop thinking about my squad. the men I had trained with, fought with, and now couldn't find. The first disappearance had been subtle. Harris, the private, had simply vanished. One moment he was with me, scanning the horizon, muttering about the shadows. The next, gone. No tracks, no equipment left behind, just empty air where he had stood. My pulse had spiked, my stomach knotted, but I told myself it was an accident. Maybe he had wandered, gotten lost. Maybe, God help me, he'd been taken by enemy forces. But then others went missing, one at a time. The communications operator, the medic, even the sergeant. They vanished silently, without a struggle, leaving only their rifles or helmets behind. Each disappearance was accompanied by a whisper, a faint, guttural utterance in the wind that seemed to mock my fear. I could almost feel them watching, judging. I moved through the desert canyon alone, scanning the horizon, calling their names. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow, swallowed by the wind. Every rock, every ridge seemed alive with intent. Shadows shifted unnaturally, teasing me with glimpses of human form before melting into the sand and air. My mind screamed for explanation, but there was none, not a single rational answer. Then I found Harris's rifle, half buried in sand, stock cracked, barrel pointing toward nothing. No tracks, no sign of struggle, no indication of where he had gone. My chest tightened as I knelt, brushing the sand from the weapon. A whisper curled around my ear. I spun, rifle raised, but there was nothing. Nothing except the desert itself, silent and waiting. The hallucinations began shortly after. At first, subtle, shapes moving in the corner of my vision, whispers in my ears that weren't there when I turned my head. Then voices, my squad, calling me, laughing, shouting, pleading. I would reach a ridge, see them waving, smiling, and by the time I ran to them, they would dissolve into nothing. I questioned my mind, my senses, my sanity. Yet the evidence was real. Helmets, boots, packs, everything left behind as if the desert itself had consumed the men whole. My rational brain refused to reconcile what I saw with what was left behind. And then I realized that the hallucinations were part of the terror. They were bait, luring me, testing me, feeding on my fear. One evening, I reached a narrow pass lined with jagged rocks. My vision blurred as the sun set, long shadows stretching like fingers across the sand. There on a ridge, I saw the sergeant, or thought I did. He waved me forward, smiled faintly. Relief flooded me, then terror. His face began to distort, limbs elongating, shadows twisting across his uniform in impossible angles. I screamed, firing at him, and the figure dissolved into dust and shadow, leaving only a whisper, "You are next." Panic took hold. I ran blindly, stumbling over rocks, my rifle clanging against stone. The desert echoed with footsteps, not mine. Whispers chased me, following every step, every heartbeat. I reached a shallow depression in the canyon and collapsed, gasping. The air was thick, heavy, pressing down on my chest. My mind teetered on the edge. Was this real? Had my men truly vanished, or had I gone mad in the desert? I tried to rationalize, to call out to the missing soldiers. I spoke their names into the empty canyon, one by one. The whispers responded, soft at first, then louder, forming indistinct words, a symphony of voices that I could not understand. Their meanings were clear, though fear, hunger, death. The desert itself had learned our names. It knew who we were. Hours, or perhaps days, passed. Time had no meaning. Shadows shifted independently of light. Shapes darted between rocks, observing, always observing. I could feel my squad's presence everywhere and nowhere. I wasn't sure if I missed them, feared them, or hated them for leaving me behind. By the time I found a small outcrop to rest, night had fallen. The desert whispered, circling me, teasing me. I imagined Harris sitting next to me, smiling, trying to reassure me. But when I blinked, he was gone. And then I heard it, the faintest shuffle of footsteps approaching. Not human, not anything I had known. I raised my rifle, adrenaline surging, and waited. Nothing appeared, only the shifting shadows, the whispers in Pashto, and the cold, deliberate pulse of the desert. My hands shook, my body ached, my mind was fraying. I realized then that this place didn't just take my comrades. It was teaching me fear, molding it, shaping it into something the desert could feed on. I survived the night, as I had survived the ambush, as I had survived the plateau of machines. But I was alone, completely, terrifyingly alone. My squad was gone, and with each heartbeat, I knew that I was now part of the desert's game, watching, waiting, whispering, and somewhere in the shadows, my friends, or the echoes of them, were still out there, lost forever to the hunger of the desert, their voices joining the whispers that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Alone. That word summed up my existence now. The desert had claimed my squad, my sense of safety, and any illusion that I was still in control. I moved into the mountains, hoping for some respite, some rational terrain where I could regroup and plan. Instead, I found a nightmare. The mountains were jagged, sharp as broken teeth, their shadows long and hostile. Every step on the loose rock and sand felt like trespassing into the desert's private domain. The sun was low, casting everything in gray and gold, but it was not light that illuminated the horror. It was shadows. Shadows that moved against the wind, against the logic of geometry, stretching and contorting with their own will. My boots crunched over loose stones as I ascended a narrow pass. I passed twisted ruins of old fortifications, perhaps Soviet, perhaps older. Rusted weapons lay scattered, but some had been arranged, placed in deliberate patterns, almost ceremonial. I realized that the desert did not just consume, it curated, creating its own grotesque displays to mock intruders. The first hallucination, or maybe it was real, struck me suddenly. A figure appeared in the corner of my vision. Humanoid, tall, thin, limbs too long. It mimicked my movements, but only imperfectly. When I raised my rifle, it did too. But its motions were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet learning human motion. I fired. Nothing. It dissolved into a black wisp that clung to the rocks and shadows. Then the whispers began, circling around me. At first faint, unintelligible, then coherent in fragments. Run, leave, join, alone. Each word sank into my mind like a cold knife, eroding rational thought. My pulse raced, and yet my legs moved forward, drawn up the pass as if by some unseen force. The terrain grew surreal. Rocks appeared where none had been. Paths split and twisted impossibly, leading me deeper into a canyon that seemed alive. The wind carried voices, shouts, screams, laughter. Some I recognized as my squad. Others were alien, guttural, the sound of a language older than any living man. I tried to call out to answer, but my voice sounded hollow and far away, swallowed by the mountains themselves. Then I saw them. Shadows not bound to the walls or rocks. Figures that moved in impossible ways. Limbs bending backward, faces stretching, mouths opening where no mouth should exist. They whispered, hissed, beckoned. I realized that the desert and the mountains were not separate. They were one entity, and I was trapped in its body. I stumbled into an abandoned cave, collapsing inside, hoping for shelter. The walls were covered with markings, hundreds of jagged symbols, humanoid figures, spirals, eyes. The deeper I ventured, the more elaborate the carvings became. I touched one, and the cold metal beneath my fingers seemed to pulse. A whisper grazed my ear. See, I saw. Shadows coalesced in the corners of the cave. Shapes flickered in and out of existence. I could feel hundreds of eyes, watching, learning, cataloging every twitch, every heartbeat. My mind teetered on the edge. Rational thought fled. Fear became the only currency, and the desert, the mountains, the shadows, whatever they were wealthier than any god. Hours or lifetimes passed in that cave. I could not tell. My memories of my squad, of base, of sunlight, became fragmented. Faces appeared and vanished. Whispers transformed into chants, into prayers, into curses. The walls seemed to breathe. The floor shifted beneath me. I realized that I was no longer simply surviving. I was part of their ritual, a pawn in a game older than human memory. Exiting the cave, I found myself on a cliff edge. Below, the desert stretched endlessly, undulating in waves of heat and shadow. Figures danced along ridges, impossibly fast. Whispers filled the air, louder than the wind, more tangible than the rocks under my hands. I raised my rifle and fired into the distance. The bullets vanished into the haze, leaving only echoes. I screamed, then laughed, then collapsed. There was no distinction between the desert, the mountains, the shadows, and me. Everything was one. The enemy was no longer Taliban, no longer insurgent. It was the land itself, alive, patient, intelligent, and hungry. As night fell, the stars blinked coldly above. Shadows gathered at the canyon edges, whispering my name, taunting me. I understood then I would never leave. Not truly. I was part of this place now, cataloged in its memory, a footnote in its eternal history of hunger and patience. The desert had taken my squad, my sanity, my sense of reality, and now it claimed me in part, leaving only enough consciousness to witness, to understand, to fear. I was alone, yes, but also watched, always watched, and the whispers never stopped. The canyon narrowed like the throat of some colossal beast, jagged cliffs looming above me like teeth ready to snap shut. Every instinct screamed for me to turn back, but there was nowhere to go. My squad was gone, swallowed by the desert, consumed by its shadows. The whispers now were constant, circling my head, forming words I could almost understand. Come, witness, belong. I stumbled forward, rifle shaking in my hands. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving only a gray, oppressive light that turned every boulder, every crevice, into a possible threat. Shadows moved independently of the weak moonlight, flickering and stretching in ways that defied physics. My mind raced. This wasn't an ambush. It wasn't insurgents. It was something older, something patient, something that had learned how to hunt men over centuries of war and sand. Then I saw it, the abyss. A cavernous pit opened before me, perfectly circular, descending into utter darkness. Its edges were jagged, lined with carvings, spirals, humanoid forms, eyes that seemed to follow me. The air vibrated with a low hum, resonating through my bones. I dropped a stone, expecting a clatter, a sound echoing back, but there was nothing. No sound returned. The abyss swallowed it all. Figures emerged from the shadows. Not men, not insurgents. Tall, thin, limbs bending at impossible angles, faces stretched, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. They moved deliberately, circling the rim of the abyss like predators. And then I saw my squad, or the semblance of them. Harris, the sergeant, the medic. Their bodies were twisted, movements jerky, unnatural. Their eyes were hollow, mouths moving in unison in a whisper that was more feeling than sound. Join us. I raised my rifle, shaking violently, and fired. Bullets hit nothing. Shadows absorbed them. The figures on the rim didn't falter. Their whispering intensified, a chorus of voices I recognized and feared, echoing through my skull. Each syllable pressed against my mind, searing fear into every nerve. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But the abyss pulled at me, a gravitational force stronger than the earth, stronger than my fear. It wasn't hunger in a physical sense. It was the hunger of time itself. The weight of countless soldiers, armies, and machines swallowed over centuries. The desert had always been alive, patient, and now it demanded a witness. I edged closer, drawn toward the rim despite every rational thought screaming otherwise. My hands grazed the carvings in the rock. Cold, hard, pulsing. I realized then that this canyon was not natural. It was a machine of shadow and stone, crafted over eons, fed by fear and war. My rifle felt meaningless. My voice was hollow. I was insignificant. Suddenly, the abyss pulsed. Shadows rose from its depths, forming a column of black smoke and sinew, taller than the cliffs themselves. Its form shifted. Humanoid one moment, machine the next, something older and unrecognizable the next. Its presence pressed into my mind, a psychic weight of history, war, and death. You belong. Behind me, my squad's twisted forms leaned forward, reaching out. Harris's elongated fingers brushed the edge of the canyon, beckoning. The sergeant's hollow eyes fixed me, unblinking. I screamed their names, firing again and again, but it was useless. The abyss did not need to kill me outright. It wanted me to see, to know, to surrender. I stumbled backward, over loose rocks, my boots skidding on sand and bone. The shadows followed without effort, gliding along cliffs, over ledges, bending physics and reality. My pulse was deafening, each beat syncing with the abyss's hum. Time warped. Seconds stretched to minutes, minutes to hours, or lifetimes. Then the hum became unbearable. It drilled into my skull, rattled my chest, vibrating my bones. I felt my sanity fraying, my rational mind slipping through the cracks. I wanted to flee, to jump into the abyss, to join them, to escape the endless watching. But the instinct to survive, the stubborn human fragment inside me, refused. I ran, down the canyon, over jagged rock and shattered bone. The abyss didn't chase me directly. It waited, patient, always watching. Whispers and shadows followed me, pressing at the edges of vision and thought, reminding me that this place was eternal, relentless. My squad's hollow voices screamed my name, mocking, pleading, warning. By the time I collapsed outside the canyon, dawn had broken pale and sickly over the desert. The abyss remained behind me, silent but alive in my mind. Shadows lingered in the corners of my vision. Whispers curled around the edges of my consciousness. I had survived the abyss physically, but the desert had claimed part of me. My squad, my sanity, and a fraction of my soul now belonged to it. The whispers continued. The shadows watched, and I knew this was not over. It never would be over. The desert was patient, the abyss eternal, and I was marked. I had seen the end of men, the hunger of war, and the machinery of shadows, and I had survived. For now, I am old now. The desert, the mountains, the abyss, they live in me as surely as my own heart. I sit in a dimly lit room, the hum of electricity the only sound, and I think back to 2005, to Afghanistan, to the squad I once led. My hands tremble, not with age, but with memory. I have tried to explain what happened, but words fail. How do you tell someone that the desert watches? That shadows have shape and intent? That a canyon, a pit, a plateau of abandoned machines could become a predator, patient and immortal? How do you describe the whispers that follow you long after the land has receded from view? The men I fought with, they are gone. Harris, the sergeant, the medic, perhaps others. Their fates are etched in my mind, and yet I cannot say what truly happened. Part of me wonders if I did not imagine it all, if the desert simply broke my mind. But no hallucination leaves this kind of imprint. No dream drains you, twists you, leaves shadows behind to haunt your waking life. The machinery of war, the rusted Soviet tanks, the jagged weapons of centuries past, was not idle. The desert had merged history, man, and metal into a single, living entity. I walked among it and survived, but it left its mark. The shadows still move in the corners of my vision. Whispers curl in my ears when the world is quiet. Even here, far from the mountains, the abyss follows. I think about fear, true fear, and how it changes a man. I saw it consume my squad, distort them, twist their humanity into something unrecognizable. I saw it in the plateau, in the village, in the canyon, in the abyss itself, and I carried it with me out of Afghanistan, the invisible burden of survival. Some call it PTSD. Others call it memory. I call it truth. There are nights when I dream of the desert. Shadows reach for me, but this time, I do not flee. I watch quietly, and the whispers echo in my mind. The abyss is patient. It waits, and I know that some fragment of it lives inside me now. Not fully, not consciously, but it waits, biding its time, whispering. History is full of machines, of armies, of wars. I have seen what happens when humanity confronts forces it cannot understand. The desert is older than any nation, older than any conflict. It sees all, remembers all, consumes all, and yet it does not hate, nor love. It simply is. And I was a witness. I have tried to warn others, to write, to tell the truth. But who listens to a man who survived something beyond reason? Who believes a soldier who claims the desert itself hunts and remembers? Who whispers the names of men long gone? I am a relic, like the machinery I saw, a living testament to the hunger and patience of something older than man. I sit here in quiet, dim light, feeling the weight of what I survived. Memory mingles with imagination. History mingles with horror. And I know, deep down, that the abyss is still out there. The desert, the mountains, the shadows, the whispers, they have not stopped. They follow, they wait, and they remember. I will die one day, perhaps in sleep, perhaps in the ordinary way, quietly, unnoticed. But I carry the truth with me, and when I do finally leave this world, I know part of me will return to the desert. Shadows, whispers, hunger, they do not forget, and neither does the abyss. I am a soldier. I am a survivor. I am a witness, and the desert is eternal.